Don't
In the
leave me
next
here alone.
14 winters, you'll give me 11 sons.
Never.
The giant Viking whispered
I
to the
will
young
return to
bride.
you.
Snow lay thick upon the ground, and the towering peaks of the northern mountains shimmered like silver in the pale light of the winter moon. In the midst of this harsh kingdom, a fortress of stone and iron rose against the storm, dark and unyielding, like the spirit of the land itself. It was here in this fortress of frost and shadow that a young bride approached the gates, her heart pounding with fear, hope, and a strange, unspoken longing. The princess had left behind everything she had ever known, her family, her warm home, the soft sunlight that danced on her garden walls. Now she came to marry a giant Viking, a warrior whose name was spoken with awe and fear alike. His deeds were legendary. He had led his warriors across frozen seas, conquered rival clans, and returned with treasures no one dared touch. Yet it was not his victories that filled her with dread. It was his silence, his towering presence, and the stories whispered by the servants and villagers, that he was cursed, bound to a fate written in frost and blood, and that the one who married him would never walk the same path again. The gates of the fortress groaned open as she approached. Soldiers in heavy furs stepped aside, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. The air inside was warmer, but the heat did little to chase away the chill that had settled in her chest. Her eyes roamed over the dark stone walls, the carved runes etched deep into the archways, and the banners that hung like frozen flames above the hall. And then she saw him. The giant Viking stood at the end of the hall, his figure immense even from a distance. Broad shoulders draped in furs, hair like spun gold falling to his shoulders, and eyes as cold and piercing as the northern ice. He did not bow, did not speak. He merely watched as if measuring her, weighing her in his gaze. The princess shivered. Not from cold, but from the weight of his presence, a force that seemed to bend the very air around him. When she was brought before him, the silence stretched long, thick with expectation. The servants had told her what to do, curtsy, speak her vows, follow his lead. But words seemed useless in the face of such an overwhelming figure. He stepped closer, each movement deliberate and measured. The floor beneath her felt unreal, as though the world had paused to witness this meeting. And then he spoke. His voice was low, rough like the grinding of stone, yet it carried a strange resonance, a power that made the walls themselves tremble. In the next 14 winters, he whispered, leaning closer so that only she could hear, you will give me 11 sons. The words hit her like a blade. Her heart leaped, then faltered, then hammered against her ribs. 11 sons in 14 winters. The prophecy, the curse, the promise. It was all in those few words, spoken like a spell. She wanted to speak, to protest, to ask how such a fate could be hers, but no sound came. The Viking's eyes searched hers, calm and unyielding, as though he could see every thought and fear hidden in her heart. She bowed her head, unsure whether it was respect, fear, or something else that drove her movement. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, but it was not a threat. It was a presence, a reminder of the power he held and of the path she had chosen or had been chosen for her. The first night in the fortress was quiet. She was led to a chamber warmed by a fire that flickered like a heartbeat. The walls were adorned with tapestries depicting battles and kings long past. Shadows danced across the floor, casting shapes that seemed alive, restless. She tried to sleep, but the words of the Viking repeated in her mind, each one a drumbeat in her chest. 11 sons, 14 winters. 11 sons, morning came, pale and fragile like a sigh across the mountains. She awoke to the sound of boots on stone, heavy and certain. The Viking entered the room, and though the firelight softened his features, it could not hide the raw strength that radiated from him. "Do not fear me," he said, and she noticed a slight tremor in his voice, almost imperceptible. "I do not ask for obedience without heart. But the winters will not wait." She studied him, searching for meaning, for a clue, and found only shadows behind his gaze. She wanted to hate him, or to fear him, or to flee, but her body refused. Instead, a strange fascination took root, like frost creeping along the edges of a window pane, cold, beautiful, inevitable. Days passed. The princess learned the rhythm of the fortress, the guards' drills, the servants' hushed whispers, the Vikings' routines. He was distant, commanding, and yet he revealed glimpses of something hidden beneath the surface. A gentleness when he spoke to the youngest pages, a quiet grief when he thought no one watched, a flicker of longing in his eyes when he gazed at the night sky, as though he were searching for something lost to time. One evening, under a sky ablaze with the aurora, she ventured into the courtyard. The snow crunched beneath her feet, and the wind tugged at her cloak. The Viking joined her, silent at first, his shadow stretching long across the frost. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked, her voice barely carrying over the wind. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked up at the lights dancing above, and for a moment his expression softened. "I do," he said finally, "but I do not believe it is unchangeable, only costly." She felt the weight of his words settle on her like snow. Costly. Every prophecy had a price, and she wondered how much of herself she would pay. A sudden movement caught her eye. In the trees beyond the wall, a figure stood, cloaked and pale, watching. When she blinked, it vanished, leaving only the whisper of the wind. Fear and curiosity collided in her chest. The Viking noticed her glance, followed it, but said nothing. That night, sleep eluded her. She thought of the figure, of the prophecy, of the giant whose touch and presence had already begun to alter her heart in ways she did not understand. And as she lay awake, she realized that fear had mingled with something else, something fierce and unexpected: anticipation. Days turned into weeks. The princess and the Viking found a rhythm in their strange, forced companionship. He taught her to ride the stallion that snorted and stamped in the courtyard. She learned the weight of his sword, the strength in his arms, and the patience in his gaze. And she discovered that beneath his armor, beneath the scars and the myth, there was a man capable of kindness, of tenderness, and of a love he had long denied himself. But even as they grew closer, the shadow of the prophecy loomed. 11 suns, 14 winters. The words echoed in every corridor, in every silence, in every glance that lingered too long. She could see the tension in his jaw when he spoke of the future, the way his fingers tightened on the hilt of his sword as if holding back not violence, but fear. One night, as the moon hung low and silver over the fortress, she approached him. He stood by the window, looking out at the fjord where the sea met ice. "Do you ever wonder if it could be different?" she asked. He did not turn to her, but she felt his attention like a warm weight against her back. "It could," he said quietly, "but the cost, you may not survive it." Her heart ached at the thought of his words. She had feared his strength, feared the prophecy, feared herself. Yet now she found she feared losing him even more. The winds outside rose suddenly, carrying a cold fury, and with it, a whisper that seemed not of this world. She felt it in her bones, a reminder that their lives were entwined not just by choice, but by something older, darker, and more powerful than either of them. And then she saw it again, the shadow in the trees beyond the wall. Only this time it did not flee. It watched, waiting, patient and silent. Her heart skipped a beat, and she realized that the story of her life, of their life together, had only just begun. The Viking turned then, his eyes locking onto hers. For the first time he smiled, not the cold, distant curve of his lips, but a real smile, soft and brief, like a sunrise breaking over a frozen horizon. "Whatever comes," he said, his voice low and certain, "we will face it together, fate or no fate." The princess nodded, her breath catching in the icy air. A chill ran through her, not of cold, but of recognition. This was no ordinary life, no ordinary love. This was a story carved from ice and shadow, from prophecy and courage, from fear and desire, and it had only begun. Outside the wind howled, shadows shifted, and in the trees the figure watched, waiting for the winter to reveal its secrets. The first chapter of her fate had begun, and the whisper of the prophecy hung heavy in the night. 11 sons, 14 winters, 11 sons. And she knew, with a certainty that made her heart tremble, that nothing would ever be the same again. Winter deepened across the fjord kingdom, and the fortress seemed to breathe with its own icy pulse. Snow drifts piled high against the walls, and the wind rattled the banners that bore the Viking's sigil, a roaring bear upon a field of silver. Inside, the princess moved through the halls with a strange mixture of caution and curiosity. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons in endurance, and new glimpses of the giant Viking she had come to marry. He remained a figure of awe, still distant, still commanding, yet softer moments began to emerge, like sunlight piercing the storm clouds. At dawn, she would hear his boots in the corridor, the slow, heavy rhythm of a man who carried both strength and burden. By midday, he would often appear in the courtyard, practicing his swordplay or riding the massive black stallion that snorted clouds of steam in the freezing air. The princess watched him from the edge of the snow, feeling her heart thrum with a strange mixture of fear and admiration. The first winter passed quietly, yet it left marks deeper than frost on stone. She felt the weight of the prophecy, the words he had whispered on their wedding night, 11 sons in 14 winters. Each night, as she lay in her chamber, the firelight flickering against the stone walls, she imagined the future. 11 sons. 11 lives that would bind her to the giant Viking in ways she could not yet comprehend. Fear pressed against her chest, but curiosity lingered alongside it, a quiet, persistent spark. One evening, he entered her chamber unannounced. His eyes, usually so steady and unreadable, held something she had never seen before: hesitation. "You fear the winters," he said softly, standing near the window where the snow drifted like powdered glass. "I do," she admitted. "I fear the prophecy, I fear what it asks of me, and I fear myself." He stepped closer, yet kept a careful distance. "And yet you remain, you do not flee. That is bravery, or perhaps something stronger." She looked at him, searching for the meaning behind his words. Was it praise, curiosity, or a subtle warning? She could not tell, and perhaps that was what drew her to him: the enigma beneath the armor, the depth beneath the scars. The next morning, a new arrival disrupted the quiet rhythm of the fortress. A small seer, cloaked in pale furs and with eyes like frozen lakes, requested an audience with the Viking. She claimed to know the truth behind the prophecy. The princess observed from the shadows as the two spoke in low tones, the words sharp like splintering ice. "She carries the mark," the seer whispered, her gaze flicking to the princess. "Not the mark of fate alone, but of change. She may bend the prophecy or shatter it." The Viking's expression remained unreadable, but the princess saw a flicker of something, hope perhaps, or fear, flash in his gaze. Later, when she asked him about it, he only said, "Some fates are written by others, some we may still write ourselves." Days later, she felt the first tremor of destiny take hold. The giant Viking approached her with the seriousness of a man facing battle, yet in his hands was a small, carved wooden toy, a horse, crude but beautiful in its simplicity. "This is for you," he said, placing it in her hands. "A reminder that life, even amid prophecy, must hold its moments of creation." The gesture startled her. He had given her something that was neither command nor expectation, yet it carried weight heavier than any sword. She accepted it, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that she could not name. As the days lengthened into weeks, the first signs of their child emerged. Though she dared not speak the words aloud, the princess felt it in her bones, the quiet strength of life growing within her. And with that life came new challenges, strange dreams of shadowed forests, whispers in the halls, and the haunting sense that unseen eyes watched her every step. One night, a blizzard swept across the kingdom with unusual fury. The wind tore against the fortress walls, rattling doors and windows, and the snow swirled like spirits dancing in chaos. The princess held the Viking's hand as they descended to the courtyard to see the damage. Yet she noticed something odd, a figure, half hidden in the storm, moving with an unnatural grace across the snow. "It watches," she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frozen air. He followed her gaze and nodded. "It is not a human," he said quietly. "Some forces do not belong to this world. Some fates are older than kings, older than gods." The figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only an eerie silence behind. The princess shivered, not from cold, but from the realization that her life and their lives were part of something far larger than she had imagined. The following weeks were filled with preparation and reflection. She studied the halls, learned the secret passages, and began to understand the subtle ways the Viking ruled his domain. Yet, in quiet moments, she noticed the cracks in his armor. The way his eyes lingered on the horizon, the tension in his jaw, the shadow that fell across his gaze when he thought no one was watching. Beneath his strength was vulnerability, a quiet grief he carried as if it were another limb. One evening, by the fire in her chamber, she found herself speaking aloud for the first time of her fears. "I do not know if I am ready," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I do not know if I can bear what is asked of me." The Viking entered without knocking, his presence filling the room. He knelt beside her, not towering, not commanding, simply present. "You are stronger than you know," he said. "Fear is natural, doubt is natural, but so is courage. And you have it whether you see it or not." She met his gaze, and for the first time she understood that the prophecy was not only a chain, it could also be a bond. A bond that required trust, patience, and the willingness to face the darkness together. The first son was born in the heart of the winter, during a night when the aurora painted the sky in flames of green and violet. The princess, exhausted but filled with awe, held the child in her arms. The Viking, who had stood silently through the ordeal, finally allowed himself a rare expression of tenderness. He placed his massive hand gently on her shoulder, his eyes reflecting pride, relief, and an emotion she could not name. Yet even in this moment of triumph, shadows lurked. The small, pale seer had warned that each child born under the prophecy would carry a part of the curse. Life and power were intertwined, and the princess realized that every breath of the child bound them closer to a destiny neither of them could fully control. One night, as she walked through the quiet halls with her newborn son swaddled in furs, she felt it again, the shadow in the trees beyond the wall. This time, it did not flee. Its gaze met hers, and for a fleeting moment she felt that the figure understood her fear, her hope, her longing. The Viking approached silently. He did not speak, only placed a protective arm around her. "They watch," he said softly. "Some forces will always be beyond our reach, but we endure, we fight, we protect what we hold dear." The princess nodded, gripping her son closer. She felt a swell of determination rising within her. She would endure, she would fight, and she would protect. Even if it meant facing powers older than kingdoms, older than men, even if it meant shaping the prophecy itself. As the night deepened, the wind rose once more, carrying whispers across the fortress walls. Some spoke of old gods, some of curses, and some of fates yet to come. The princess stood at the window, watching the aurora shimmer across the sky, thinking of the 14 winters ahead, the 11 suns promised, and the giant who had become more than a warrior, more than a shadow. He had become a part of her life, inseparable and impossible to forget. The shadow shifted in the distance, the figure watching still, waiting for the winter to reveal its secrets. And the princess knew with a certainty that made her heart both tremble and soar that their story had only begun. 11 suns, 14 winters, a prophecy, a promise. And the quiet, dangerous, beautiful spark of something neither of them could yet name. The first winter had passed, the first sun had been born, and the fires beneath the ice had begun to burn. The fjord kingdom remained shrouded in winter, Yet the palace no longer felt like a fortress of mere stone. It had become a living entity, pulsing with life, secrets, and shadows. Snow blanketed the battlements, turning the high walls into icy spires that glistened like crystal in the pale sunlight. Inside, the princess moved with quiet purpose, carrying her firstborn son in her arms. Each day brought new responsibilities, new fears, and new mysteries that seemed to whisper from every corner of the castle. The giant Viking had grown quieter in recent weeks, his towering presence still commanding, yet tinged with thoughtfulness. He walked the halls alone for long stretches, staring out at the frozen fjord as if searching for something beyond the horizon. The princess, curious and cautious, followed him at a distance, sensing the weight he carried, not just the burden of the prophecy, but of a past entwined with forces older than the kingdom itself. One evening, when the aurora painted the sky in green and violet flames, the Viking called her to the highest tower. The wind whipped around them, and the snow danced like spirits across the battlements. He held a small, weathered map in his hands, its edges frayed and ink faded by time. "There is a place," he said, his voice low, "beyond the forests and the mountains, a place where fate itself is said to be carved into stone. We must go there, you, me, and our son." Her heart raced. Travel in winter was dangerous even for a man of his strength, yet she saw determination in his eyes, a fire that matched her own. "Why?" she asked, gripping the map. "What do we hope to find?" "The truth of the prophecy," he said. "Not the words that haunt us, but the meaning behind them. Only then can we shape the future rather than wait for it." The decision was made. They would leave the fortress under the cover of night, traveling through forests thick with snow, across frozen rivers, and into mountains where no light penetrated. The princess prepared for the journey with both excitement and fear. She dressed warmly, secured her child against her chest, and followed the Viking into the dark, silent night. The forest swallowed them, trees towering like guardians, their branches heavy with frost. Every step was measured, cautious, yet the princess felt an unexpected thrill. The wind carried whispers, not from any living creature but from shadows that seemed to move with intent. "It watches us," she murmured, clutching her son tighter. The Viking nodded, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Yes, some forces have existed since the beginning. They test, they wait, they measure. We must be ready for anything." Hours passed and the snow deepened. The princess grew weary, her legs aching, yet she pressed on. In the heart of the forest, a clearing appeared, surrounded by ancient stones etched with runes that glowed faintly under the moonlight. She gasped, realizing this was no ordinary place. This was sacred, ancient, alive with power. A figure stepped from the shadows. Cloaked in white, with hair like frost and eyes that shone with unnatural light, the being studied them silently. The princess's heart leapt. This was the entity she had glimpsed before, the Watcher, the Messenger, or perhaps something older still. "You seek the truth," the figure said, voice soft but echoing across the clearing. "Yet truth is not free. Every step forward demands courage. Every answer carries a price." The Viking stepped forward, placing himself protectively in front of the princess. "We are prepared," he said. "Whatever it takes, we will face it together." The figure nodded slowly. "Then you must each confront what lies within your heart. Only then will the path be clear." Without warning, the world shifted. The princess found herself in a vision, standing in a hall of mirrors. Each reflection showed a different version of herself, some strong, some weak, some fearful, some brave. Her first instinct was to flee, yet the Viking's voice echoed in her mind. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. She touched one of the mirrors, and the glass rippled like water. In it she saw a future where she gave birth to 11 sons, not as a task, but as a series of choices filled with love, guidance, and strength. Another mirror showed a future of despair, where fear and doubt ruled, and the prophecy consumed both her and the Viking. Tears stung her eyes as she understood the weight of the prophecy. It was not simply a decree, it was a challenge, a test of heart, of will, of trust. She stepped away from the mirrors, grounding herself in the present. Meanwhile, the Viking faced his own trial. The vision forced him to relive battles he had fought long ago, victories won at terrible cost, and mistakes that had haunted him. He saw himself as both hero and monster, protector and destroyer. And then he saw her, his bride, his anchor, the mother of his child, looking at him not with fear but with trust. The realization hit him with a force stronger than any sword. To love and protect her meant embracing vulnerability, admitting his own fears, and letting go of the need to control everything. Hours, or perhaps moments, passed. When they awoke from the vision, they were back in the clearing, the runes glowing softly. The Watcher smiled faintly. "You have seen yourselves," the figure said. "Now you know what must be done. Shape your destiny or be shaped by it." The journey back to the fortress was quieter, each step heavy with thought. The princess and the Viking did not speak much, but the silence between them was no longer cold, it was shared, a space where trust and understanding grew. She realized that the prophecy was not merely a burden, but a path that could bring them closer if they faced it together. Days passed after their return, and the princess noticed a change in the Viking. He spoke more openly, laughed quietly at her small jokes, and allowed moments of tenderness that had once seemed impossible. Yet the shadow of the prophecy remained. Each son born under its decree would carry part of the curse, part of the ancient power that had shaped the Vikings' life. They had faced visions, but real trials awaited them in the winters to come. One night, as snow fell silently over the fortress, the princess stood at the window with her child. The aurora lit the sky, painting it in hues of green, violet, and gold. She felt the warmth of the Viking's hand on her shoulder. "We have seen what is ahead," he said softly. "But knowing is not enough. We must be ready always." A sudden movement in the courtyard drew their attention. Shadows moved with unnatural grace, slipping between the trees and walls. The princess's heart raced. The Watcher from the forest, another entity. Or a warning from the forces that governed their fate. "We are not alone," she whispered. "No," the Viking said, his voice firm but calm. "And we never were, but together we are stronger than any shadow." Weeks later, the second winter began. The princess carried the weight of the prophecy more consciously now. Each day was a balance of fear and hope, duty and desire, courage and doubt. The fortress felt alive with possibilities, and yet she knew that danger lingered at the edges, in whispers, in shadows, and in visions that never fully faded. The first snow of the second winter brought another challenge. A rival clan, seeking to exploit the Viking's absence during his journey, attempted a raid. The fortress shook under the force of their attack, walls rattling and banners whipping violently. The princess found herself in the great hall, holding her child and helping direct servants and guards to safety. Her heart pounded, not with fear alone, but with determination she had never known. The Viking returned swiftly, cutting through the intruders with skill and precision. Yet when he entered the hall, his eyes found the princess first. Relief softened the edge of his expression, and for a moment the chaos of battle fell away. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said, his voice low but full of admiration. "I am learning," she replied, her lips curving into a small smile despite the tension. The attackers were repelled, but the message was clear. The world outside the fortress was dangerous, and the prophecy would not protect them from those who sought power, revenge, or chaos. Every winter, every sun, every step forward required vigilance, courage, and unity. As the storm settled, the princess looked out at the mountains, thinking of the shadows they had faced, the visions that had tested their hearts, and the power that lingered in every corner of their lives. The Viking joined her silently, and together they watched the aurora shimmer across the sky. "We are not simply surviving," he said. "We are building, together." She leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his strength and the quiet promise of protection. "Together," she whispered. Yet beyond the walls, in the deep forests and frozen peaks, the watcher lingered, patient and silent. Winter after winter, shadow after shadow, it waited for the next move in a game older than kingdoms, older than men. And the princess knew that the trials ahead would test them further. She would need every ounce of courage, every spark of hope, every fragment of love to face the winters to come. The prophecy remained, daunting and unyielding. 11 suns, 14 winters. And a path that demanded not only endurance, but transformation. The fires beneath the ice were no longer hidden. They burned brighter, stronger, and more dangerous than ever. And the princess and the Viking were ready to face them together. The final winters came quietly at first, as if the world itself held its breath. The fjord kingdom, blanketed in frost and snow, seemed to wait for something inevitable, an event older than memory, older than kings. Within the fortress, the princess and the Viking moved through the halls with a calm born of experience and shared struggle. Their first son had grown, and the promise of more children lingered in the quiet moments between lessons, hunts, and patrols. Yet with each winter, the weight of prophecy pressed more heavily upon them. The princess had changed. No longer timid or uncertain, she carried herself with a quiet strength. She had learned the fortress, the forest, and the rhythms of the Viking's life. But most importantly, she had learned herself. She understood fear, yes, but also courage. She understood duty, but also choice. And she understood that love was not merely born, it was forged in the fires of hardship, patience, and trust. The Viking watched her with a mixture of awe and quiet reverence. He had once believed himself unchangeable, bound by a curse older than the first winter. But through the trials of the forest, the visions of mirrors, the birth of their child, and the battles both literal and metaphorical, he had come to see that he could be more than the warrior he had always been. He could be a protector, a partner, and a father. One evening, as the northern lights danced across the sky in brilliant green and violet, the princess approached him on the battlements. The wind was bitter, but she did not shiver. "We have faced shadows," she said softly, "and yet here we are. The prophecy has not broken us, it has shaped us." He turned to her, his eyes reflecting both pride and vulnerability. "It has tested us," he said, "but now we must decide how it ends. Not the words, not the winters, but us. Together we can choose." Her heart beat faster. Together they had faced storms, rivals, visions, and fear. But this was the ultimate trial, the choice to embrace love, fate, and the future without hesitation. The first challenge of the final winters came swiftly. From the frozen forests, a new threat emerged, a dark entity older than the kingdom itself. It moved like shadow, silent and relentless, seeking to claim the Viking's lineage for its own power. The princess and the Viking prepared for what would be their greatest battle yet. Guards were summoned, runes were carved into stone for protection, and the fortress hummed with the energy of magic and courage. On the night of the confrontation, the aurora blazed overhead, casting light upon the snow like celestial fire. The princess held her first son close, while the Viking stood beside her, his sword heavy in his hand, yet his eyes fixed on her and the life they had built. The shadow came in waves, darkness pressing against the walls of the fortress. The Viking fought with strength that shook the snow from the battlements, but the princess did not remain idle. She had learned the runes, the ancient words, and the ways of the forest spirits. Her voice rang out, calling power from the earth, the wind, and the frozen peaks. Light and shadow clashed, the night filled with echoes of struggle, courage, and hope. Through it all they remained together, each protecting the other. The shadow roared and twisted, but it could not break the bond forged in love, struggle, and shared purpose. Finally, with one decisive effort, the Viking struck true, and the shadow dissipated into the wind. Silence returned, broken only by the sound of the aurora shimmering across the sky. The princess wept, not from fear, but from relief. The Viking pulled her close, their foreheads touching, and for the first time they allowed themselves to feel the depth of what they had endured together. "It is over," she whispered. "For now," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. But even prophecy cannot erase what we have learned. The birth of their second son came as winter deepened. Unlike the first, this birth was filled with calm and quiet joy, a celebration of resilience and hope. Each son thereafter came not as a burden but as a promise, a reflection of their courage, their love, and their choices. The prophecy, once a looming shadow over their lives, became a symbol of growth, endurance, and transformation. With each son, the Viking grew more human, shedding the hardness that had once defined him. His bond with the princess deepened, no longer driven solely by prophecy or duty, but by genuine affection, trust, and admiration. They trained their sons, taught them the ways of the land, and instilled in them a sense of honor and courage. And through it all, the princess and Viking found joy in small moments, sharing laughter by the fire, walking through the snowy courtyards, and watching the aurora together in quiet wonder. Yet the final winter held its own trial. The princess, carrying her 11th son, fell ill. Not from weakness, but from the strain of carrying the last promise of the prophecy. The Viking, terrified and helpless, remained by her side, holding her hand through nights filled with pain and uncertainty. He whispered words of strength, recalling every lesson, every trial, every vision they had shared. "You are the heart of this family," he said, his voice steady despite his fear. "And we will see this through, together." The princess, exhausted but resolute, smiled faintly. "Together," she echoed, and in that moment she felt the culmination of all their winters, all their sons, all their struggles. She felt the power of choice, love, and courage surging through her. When the 11th son was born, the fortress erupted in quiet celebration. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but not as a sentence. It had been a journey of learning, trust, and transformation. The Viking held their son, marveling at the life in his arms, and the princess rested beside him, their hearts beating in unison. In the days that followed, the kingdom felt different. The winds no longer carried whispers of doom, and the shadows in the forest seemed less threatening. The fortress, once merely a stronghold, felt like a home, a place of warmth, love, and strength. The princess and the Viking walked through the courtyards together, watching their sons play in the snow. Each child was a reminder of hope, courage, and the power of choice. One night, as the aurora painted the sky in brilliant colors, the princess and the Viking stood together on the highest tower. The wind was cold, but they did not feel it. Their hands were clasped, their hearts intertwined, and the weight of prophecy had finally transformed into a bond of shared triumph. "We have survived," she said softly, "and we have changed," he replied, "not because of the prophecy, but because of us. Because of love, trust, and courage." The northern lights shimmered above, as if blessing them with their brilliance. And in the distance, she thought she saw a faint figure watching from the forest, not as a threat, but as an acknowledgement of their strength, their choice, and the winters they had endured together. The princess realized that life would never be simple, nor would it be free of trials. But they had learned the most important lesson, that destiny could be faced, shaped, and even transformed by courage, love, and unity. 11 sons, 14 winters. A prophecy that had once loomed like a shadow had become a legacy of hope, strength, and resilience. The Viking, once a figure of fear and legend, had become a partner, a father, and a man capable of redemption. And the princess, once fearful and uncertain, had become a force of courage, wisdom, and love. The fires beneath the ice had burned brightly, and now they glowed warmly, illuminating the path forward. Together they had faced shadows, visions, battles, and prophecy. Together they had transformed fear into strength, uncertainty into courage, and destiny into a choice. The final winter passed, leaving the kingdom quiet, the snow crisp and untouched, and the aurora blazing in the night sky. In the fortress, the princess and the Viking watched their children sleep, their hearts full, their souls intertwined and their bond unbreakable. Outside, the wind carried no more whispers of doom, only the soft sighs of winter fading into promise. And somewhere beyond the mountains and forests, the watcher of old seemed to nod in approval, its presence no longer threatening, but respectful of the courage, love, and wisdom that had shaped the family. The princess turned to the Viking, smiling. "This is our story," she said. "Yes," he replied, his eyes reflecting the northern lights, "and it is only the beginning." Together they looked out across the fjord, the snow sparkling like diamonds under the aurora. The prophecy had been fulfilled, the shadows had been faced, and the fires beneath the ice had become a light that would guide them, their sons, and their kingdom for generations to come. The winds of the final winter whispered softly through the fortress, carrying with them a promise of peace, hope, and endless possibilities. And in the hearts of the princess and the Viking, there was only one truth. Together, they had overcome, endured, and transformed their fate.